No, my friend. This will last for centuries. Even long after we are gone, they will remain in mental chains, enslaved by the idea of salvation. They will teach it to their children, generation after generation, for 400 years or more.
You are more wicked than I thought, preacher.
Not wicked, sir. Wise. We are simply giving them hope while ensuring they remain in their rightful place.
And so, a plan was set in motion. A plan that would enslave not just bodies but minds for centuries to come. The Bible became both a tool of salvation and a weapon of control, and the Great Deception began. This is the story of how Christianity was used to manipulate, subjugate, and deceive the minds of the Jamaican people for over 400 years.
From the moment European colonizers set foot on Jamaican soil, Christianity was used as a powerful tool to enslave not only the bodies but also the minds of the Jamaican people. This is the story of how Christianity was weaponized, leading to centuries of mental, spiritual, and cultural subjugation, a deception so profound that its effects are still felt today. The arrival of Christianity in Jamaica. In 1494, when Christopher Columbus arrived in Jamaica, the island was inhabited by the Taino people. Their spiritual beliefs, deeply connected to nature, were soon eradicated as European colonization began. In 1509, the Spanish conquered Jamaica, and the Catholic Church established its presence. With the arrival of the British in 1655, Protestantism, particularly the Church of England, became the dominant religion. It was during British colonization, however, that Christianity began to be systematically used as a tool to subjugate and control the minds of the enslaved African population. By the early 18th century, enslaved Africans were being brought to Jamaica to work on the sugar plantations under brutal conditions. In this harsh environment, the enslaved population was not only physically shackled but also subjected to a form of mental slavery through religious indoctrination. Missionaries were sent to Jamaica to convert the African population to Christianity, using the Bible as a means of instilling obedience and compliance. Christianity as a tool of control. Colonial authorities and plantation owners quickly realized the power of religion as a tool for control. By teaching enslaved Africans that their suffering was divinely ordained and that they would be rewarded in the afterlife if they remained obedient, Christianity became a psychological weapon. The Bible was used selectively, with passages like Ephesians 6:5, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ," being emphasized to reinforce subjugation. One of the most notorious proponents of this form of religious control was Reverend William Knibb, a Baptist missionary who arrived in Jamaica in 1824. While Knibb initially fought for the rights of the enslaved and was later seen as an abolitionist, his early work highlighted how Christianity was used to justify slavery. He once said, "The Negroes are incapable of freedom. Their mental faculties are insufficient." Although Knibb eventually became a vocal opponent of slavery, his earlier sentiments reflected the widespread belief that Africans were inherently inferior and needed religious guidance. Despite the oppressive use of Christianity, not all enslaved Africans accepted the religion blindly. Many resisted, blending their African spiritual traditions with the Christian teachings imposed on them. This gave birth to Afro-Christian religious movements like revivalism and pocomania. These syncretic forms of Christianity combined African rituals, drumming, and spiritual practices with Christian symbols and beliefs. Through these movements, enslaved Jamaicans found ways to resist the mental chains imposed by colonial Christianity, reclaiming their spiritual agency. However, the colonizers were quick to suppress any form of religious or spiritual practice that deviated from the strict Protestant or Catholic doctrines. Practices such as obeah, an African-derived spiritual practice, were outlawed by the colonial authorities. The Obeah Act of 1760 made it illegal to practice obeah, and severe punishments were imposed on those caught performing rituals. The act was passed in direct response to the Tacky Rebellion of 1760, a slave uprising led by an enslaved African named Tacky. The rebellion, heavily influenced by Obeah practitioners, demonstrated the power of African spirituality in organizing resistance against slavery. The colonial government responded by cracking down on all forms of African spiritual expression, further entrenching Christianity as the only acceptable form of religion. Emancipation came to Jamaica in 1834, but the mental and spiritual enslavement of the Jamaican people continued. Even after the physical chains were removed, Christianity remained a tool for controlling the minds of the newly freed population. The church became an institution of moral authority, reinforcing colonial values and suppressing any attempts at spiritual or cultural autonomy. Christian leaders preached obedience to the colonial government, and any deviation from Christian norms was met with harsh condemnation. During this period, the rise of the Rastafarian movement in the 1930s posed a direct challenge to the mental enslavement imposed by Christianity. Rastafarians, led by figures like Leonard Howell, rejected the Christian narrative of a white God and a passive, suffering Jesus. Instead, they embraced a more Afrocentric worldview, identifying Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia as the living God. Rastafarianism was a direct rejection of the colonial Christianity that had been forced upon the Jamaican people for centuries. The movement emphasized black empowerment, spiritual liberation, and a return to African roots, in direct opposition to the mental chains imposed by European Christianity. Today, the legacy of Christianity's role in the enslavement of the Jamaican mind is still evident. Churches remain powerful institutions in Jamaican society, often preaching doctrines that reinforce obedience, submission, and passivity. Many Jamaicans still adhere to the belief that suffering is a divine test, and that salvation can only be found through strict adherence to Christian teachings. This mentality has been criticized by thinkers like Alan Watts, a British philosopher known for his work on Eastern spirituality and challenging traditional Western religious doctrines. Watts argued that the concept of an external punitive God was a tool used by religious institutions to control people's behavior. He believed that we ourselves are God, and that true spiritual liberation comes from realizing that divinity lies within, not outside of us. Watts's teachings resonate with the idea that religions like Christianity were invented to control people, particularly marginalized groups like the enslaved Africans in Jamaica, by convincing people that they are inherently sinful and in need of salvation from an external source. Religious institutions create a psychological dependency that can be exploited for power. The great deception of Christianity in Jamaica is not just a historical phenomenon, it is a continuing reality. While many Jamaicans have found comfort and community within the church, the religion's origins as a tool of mental and spiritual control cannot be ignored. By selectively using scripture to justify slavery, colonial authorities created a system in which physical and mental enslavement were intertwined, leaving a lasting legacy on the Jamaican consciousness. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to reclaim spiritual autonomy in Jamaica as more people turn to alternative forms of spirituality that emphasize personal empowerment and connection to African roots. The teachings of philosophers like Alan Watts, as well as the resurgence of interest in Afro-Jamaican spiritual practices, are helping to challenge the mental chains imposed by centuries of religious indoctrination. Jamaica's history is one of resilience and resistance, and as the nation continues to grapple with the legacy of colonialism, the time has come to confront the role that Christianity has played in enslaving the minds of its people. Only by recognizing this truth can Jamaicans begin the process of true spiritual liberation.